Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about how the blind Nintendo haters will not stop. No matter what, regardless of what happens, it seems like there's always going to be people out there that are going to twist the information that comes out to put out a negative message, a negative narrative, even when things are looking actually pretty good. So today I want to dive into a few different topics that have come up since Nintendo's recent financials, and also just a couple big articles going around that a lot of people think are rather ridiculous, so that's what we're diving into today. But before getting into it all, let me just ask that if you find yourself enjoying my videos and you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate your subscription. So one talking point that's come out from Nintendo's recent financial report is that Star Fox and Yoshi did not show up, and what that means is that they did not hit 1 million copies sold since they came out for this quarter. Now for Yoshi, that might spell slightly worse news because it came out in May, but in the case of Star Fox wasn't even out for an entire week before the quarter ended. So to come out and say that Star Fox flopped when we only have a few days of data that's less than a total week, when that's just going to be a fraction of the lifetime sales for this game, that's really jumping to some big conclusions. So there's that narrative that's been going around. But what's really been the talk of the town has been these different articles coming out from IGN. So for example here, IGN posted on Twitter, Switch 2 sales are down by more than a third compared to the console's explosive launch a year ago. And as you see, there's already a community note, readers added context, Switch 2 quarterly sales declined 34.4% year over year from launch, but lifetime sales totaled 23.68 million units, making it Nintendo's fastest selling dedicated video game platform to date. This is the case. The Switch 2 has nearly hit 24 million systems sold in just a little bit over a year. This is actually really good. This is the fastest selling Nintendo console of all time, but IGN chooses to twist the data to suggest something very bad is happening. But the fact of the matter is this, when the Switch 2 came out, of course, at launch, it's going to have a very explosive launch. They're going to sell a lot of systems immediately. You're going to have the day one buyers. Nintendo actually took a lot of time and effort to make sure they had as much stock as possible. So yes, they came out with Mario Kart World, and they had Donkey Kong Bonanza come out that second month, that big 1-2 punch. Of course, sales are going to be really strong at launch. It's not like something super special or crazy was going on during a similar time this year. We had Yoshi and Star Fox come out, which are good games, but are not going to push console sales so significantly that it's going to match up to the launch of Switch 2 with Mario Kart World. Something that I think is worth pointing out, Nintendo sold 19.86 million units for the fiscal year ending with March of 2026. And what's interesting about this number is that initially Nintendo was actually forecasting to sell 15 million units during this fiscal year. They then updated that to 19 million, and they then still exceeded that number by a little bit. For this current fiscal year, Nintendo's actually forecasting 16.5 million, which is lower than the fiscal year that just ended. However, as I just pointed out, initially, for their first fiscal year with Switch 2, they were forecasting 15 million, so they're still forecasting above that. And with the last fiscal year, they actually increased the forecast and then exceeded that. So I just think that's worth pointing out, and even if they don't do that this time around, 16.5 million units is still a lot, and if they hit that number or are close to it, the Switch 2 will be doing really well. Regardless, the Switch 2 currently is still, to date, the fastest selling Nintendo console of all time. So when you see articles like this from IGN that are spinning things to be a negative when the Switch 2 is literally the fastest selling Nintendo console of all time, it's just a very strange position to take. But things get stranger when you start to notice a trend with IGN, because it just kind of seems like they are continually putting out negative headlines when perhaps those negative headlines aren't really warranted. So here's one that's been doing the rounds. The Switch 2 is an iterative update console. The Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Star Fox remakes are safe bets with generic art styles. The Mario movies are by the numbers. Is Nintendo losing its soul? And I've actually seen a lot of people respond to this, quote tweet this. I've done it myself. And IGN's actually reposted the article on Twitter more than once. So like they're standing by it. They're really want to push this narrative, this negative headline, and they are continuing to do so even when there's a lot of positive numbers, and they're just choosing to twist things to suggest things are worse than they actually are. Like, I know, and this has happened before, where I've had conversations with people who don't pay attention to these things so closely. They're like, oh, I heard the Switch 2 is not doing that well. The fastest selling Nintendo console of all time is not doing that well? Think about how stupid that sounds. That's what a lot of these headlines are making casual people believe who don't actually pay attention to the actual data, the actual numbers, and read through these articles. They're just gonna be scrolling through social media, be it Instagram, Twitter, what have you. They see these headlines, they believe it because, well, that's just how it works on the internet, unfortunately, and they move on with their lives, especially coming from a big venue like IGN. A lot of people respect IGN, but when you just continue to see these consistent negative headlines when there isn't really much reason to be negative, I think it's worthy of questioning. Now, I did actually go ahead and read through the article, and I still don't really agree with the points. There is intelligence behind the perspective, it is their opinion, and they are entitled to their opinion. But there are some weird things that are still said within the article, like right here. Twilight Princess, the solidly mid-sequel, remains lower on the tier list than the Zelda games the company made on its own terms. So the argument, or part of the argument that the article is making, is that the times where Nintendo has opted to do things on their own terms and not try to appeal to the masses, they've been better. And I understand that perspective. There have been times where, yeah, maybe Nintendo has decided to do something that's a little bit more along the lines of what the masses are hoping for. And so they bring up this example of the Wind Waker, how the Wind Waker was an amazing game, but when it was first shown off, it really threw people. It was a great surprise. It was a curveball. People didn't expect a cel-shaded toon Zelda following up Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and then that Zelda Space World demo that seemed to be kind of suggesting that they were going to just basically make a better looking version of Ocarina of Time. And they point out how the Wind Waker actually got a lot of blowback by fans. And so following that little bit of controversy, Nintendo did decide to do something a bit different with Twilight Princess, which was something more realistic. It was inspired by Lord of the Rings, a very successful trilogy at the time, one of the most successful trilogies ever in terms of movies. And Twilight Princess went on to become the best-selling Zelda game for many years until Breath of the Wild came out. And also on Metacritic, it has a Metacritic must play. Based on 73 critic reviews, it has a 95. It's one of the highest rated games there is, yet this person is saying that it's a solidly mid sequel that remains lower on the tier list of Zelda games where Nintendo made games on their own terms. Just because Nintendo made something that was more core-centric or a little bit more realistic, that doesn't automatically mean it was less inspired or it lacked ideas. Twilight Princess has some of the coolest ideas in the series, some of the best designed boss fights, some of the coolest items. The ball and chain, the spinner, there's tons of creativity and soul in Twilight Princess. Like, this notion that Twilight Princess is lacking in soul, I find to be a very pseudo-intellectual point, to be quite frank. So, getting back to the claim on Twitter, which, to be clear, I don't know if it's the same person making that point. Two different things. To say Star Fox and Ocarina of Time remake have generic art styles, like, I just feel like that statement is generic without actually any substance behind the thought. Star Fox is very different. It's an art style that is completely unexpected. Yes, it's leaning more towards realism, which maybe some people might choose to think as generic, but I don't think that's really fair in the slightest. This is not an art style Nintendo really does, and it's not realistic as in photorealistic. These are a whole bunch of furry animals being designed in a realistic way. It's very different. They actually went for something bold that actually did lead to a great deal of controversy, not too different from the Wind Waker, which is what the writer of this article was making the point of, that the Wind Waker was something with soul where Nintendo was daring and not afraid of what people would think. That's what Star Fox is. A lot of people were not excited about that. They wanted something cel-shaded, more cartoon looking. Nintendo dared with this art style. It's not uninspired, it was a risk. And I think a really good one that was worth it. And perhaps something that's not being considered here is that Nintendo, because of the Switch 2, actually has more options in terms of choosing art styles that would work. The Switch 2 is a far more powerful console. For generations, Nintendo has had to have been more selective with their art styles, so we've actually seen a lot more cel-shaded games and things like that over the years, and I do think some fans are perhaps a little bit taken back by these more realistic art styles by Nintendo, this is just because Nintendo can now pull off these art styles and they can look good. It's not because Nintendo has lost their inspiration. Choosing something cel-shaded doesn't inherently mean it's inspired, it's just an art style choice. The industry is actually inundated with cel-shaded art styles, so there's just different options here. Point is though, just calling it a generic art style, I think that's dumb. And in terms of Ocarina of Time, we barely seen the game. We don't even know what we're looking at here. But what I can tell you from what we have seen of Ocarina of Time so far, they are doing tremendous mass redesigns. The Deku Tree is completely different, as I said like 20 times already in different videos. The same with Link, like his clothes are made of leaves and plants and there's layers to it. The hat has accessories on it now. Like, this is not anything we've ever seen before. So to say it's generic literally makes no sense. It's not a smart statement to make. It really just seems rooted in this effort to say something that's rage baiting to get clicks. And when you look at the consistency of IGN making these points when we have objective data to speak to the contrary, when considering Switch 2 sales numbers, it really just seems like there's more of a narrative here to, again, get more clicks, which is usually the point of all this blind Nintendo hate that's not based off something meaningful. I'm not to sit here trying to say that Nintendo doesn't make mistakes. They do. But these aren't them. The Star Fox art style, the Ocarina of Time art style, those aren't the mistakes. The Switch 2 being the best-selling Nintendo console in video game history, and actually, the Switch 2 is not just the fastest, best-selling Nintendo console in video game history for its first year, but it's literally the fastest-selling video game console ever, period, for its first year. Anyone who construes that as a mistake, I don't know how you do that. But that's what happens. That's how the internet is nowadays. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.